Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's probably not as exciting as some of the talks we've had previously. Um, so the key point I want to make here is the kind of the artificial separation of sustainability aims and central business case or project cases. Depending on where you are, you might do different processes or project initialization, then a business case. But we quite often find these stages are separated from carbon reduction and sustainability aims, which is, in my mind, an artificial separation because they should be key functions. Um, but are they, as far as your company or organization are concerned? So I thought I'd give a little bit about me because it's created slightly different perspective on business cases. So I'm currently working as a net zero project manager at Bradford Council, and we've got a clear focus on creating economic growth and prosperity for the residents of Bradford, whilst also reducing the carbon impact and emission impact of the region. So it's not a small task. But I started my career in the arts, and this is where a lot of my project kind of ideas have come about in a very fast-paced industry where there's always a new show or a new event. Your processes become very streamlined and your processes become very minimal and very focused because you can be doing 5, 6 large projects a week, or be working on 5, 6 large scale shows in a period of 6 months to come around. So you have to be very, very streamlined with your processes. Otherwise, you just skip things out. I think that's where a lot of my kind of ideas have come from. I've obviously moved more into the built environment sustainability since then, which is a tad slower, to put it mildly. um, it's kind of the introduction of kind of where we're coming from. Organisations across the UK have got carbon reduction pledges or sustainability pledges. If you're in the private sector and bidding on kind of public sector contracts, you have to have a sustainability or carbon reduction plan to win work. I can't remember the exact threshold where that kicks in, but if it's a large scale tender, you have to have that commitment and those plans in place. Now, educational institutions have to have a sustainability or carbon reduction plan. They're very interchangeable with the way people use them, but they're not. They shouldn't be. And there's a lot of legislation. So the nation's going to be carbon neutral, net zero by 2050, depending on which kind of organisation you read the details from. And the UK grid is aiming to be 90 to 95% kind of carbon zero emission by 2035 was the latest one. So when we go back to our projects, are these key policy and market forces being reflected in how we're thinking about our project planning and how we're thinking about our key outcomes? Are we really considering this as a central part of everything we're doing, or is it being treated as an add-on, a tag-on, a tick box exercise almost to satisfy consumers or your legislative commitments? And how is that looking across the organizational wider strategies? With the organizations having these commitments to have a strategy to win this work, is it actually in place? Are you as project managers in your organization briefed on how you're going to reduce your carbon emissions? Is that part of what you're learning and being taught, or is it really not there? And how is that reflected in the project creation and planning process? I've worked in a few organisations and I've seen very different approaches, and it's quite interesting to see the differences. So this is a kind of map of it's not the most complicated one, but it's kind of the map of the process that I've quite often seen, particularly in kind of more built environment projects. We start with that project concept, which will be, we're going to build a new school or a new warehouse, whatever it is. And that kind of concept then gets dropped onto the project team. None of the question beforehand is there, just this is what we want to do. We then start working as a project team to create that brief, to feasibility and the early stage business case, all to justify the concept that we've been told we're going to do. Then we do a full business case and project plan. Then we start with our technical design. And then at some point in the technical design, quite commonly kind of REBA stage 3 and 4, if you're familiar with kind of architectural processes, that's when we start getting into that technical design and some really detail. Someone then goes, oh, how does this fit in with our sustainability goals? What's the impact of this on the carbon emissions? What's this? At this stage, the consultants and the engineers and everyone else have already started coming up with solutions. We've already started talking about, cost engineering. We've started talking about a lot of things before we've got there. And then suddenly we go, oh, sustainability. And then it's a real pivot point in the project. Do you go back and start spending money redoing those designs? Do you go back to the start and start redoing that project brief? Or do you do what usually I've seen happen, and then those kind of concepts are rejected because the technical design's already there and the project is already almost fixed in people's heads about what it's going to be. So why is that? Why is that the case so often? So for me, this comes back to very key issues in the project environment and the way that we're working. It is the project briefcase, as I've said, is a singular solution. It's already a named solution to whichever problem was going to be resolved. We're not looking at the project brief and the business case process really as a real examination of what we're trying to solve. We're quite often stuck in this rigid mindset that as a project team that we've got our solution, we've got our project, and we go forward with it. And our project brief is about examining, and business case process becomes about examining minor differences in delivery. Are we going to put solar panels on it? Are we not? Are we going to build it on this site or on this site? Again, I do apologize. I'm very built environment focused with the way I'm talking here, but it's quite an easy way of kind of examining this issue. So I really see that this process is being used as a bias confirmation route, which at no point are we really examining anything sustainability. Are we really thinking about our solution in any sort of grandiose or strategic terms? It's already a set path. So we really should be going, when we get that brief, going, well, why are you giving me that brief? Why am I getting this project brief? Or why am I being asked to write this project brief for this particular project? What is it? What are we trying to do? Go back to the strategies that the organization will have and those wider goals. Does it fit in with those? Does it make sense? Because there's a lot of projects that happen, especially in large organizations, that aren't necessarily aligned with the wider strategies of the organization. There might be a particular service as a service need and doesn't necessarily think about how that affects those larger goals. That service is just thinking about how it can improve its delivery or replacing a problem it has. And then we can go back to, we had a talk earlier about, that was mentioned, the iron triangle, we mentioned quite a few times today. Again, we go back to this iron triangle approach, which I believe still has merit, but the quality needs to be assessed far more rigorously against strategic aims and sustainability, which this sustainability should be one of the strategic aims. So how do we change that? Where does that come from? And then again, this is from personal experience. The project team are often hyper fixated, and I'm not going to say that I'm any better than anyone else at this, but when you work at something, you want that item to be a success. So this process becomes about getting these stages through and not rocking the boat necessarily, and going back and saying, what is going on? And then that sustainability, how do we represent that sustainability in this case, in this business case? I know from experience in the public sector, the 5 case treasury model doesn't include anything on sustainability. You have to really work it in there if you're going to use that style of business case, and really re-examine how you're examining cost. And then that's a major point as well. How are you evaluating costs? So another talk earlier, they were talking about sustainability is profitable. However, a lot of these actions come with an upfront capital cost, and perhaps project delays. But in 10, 15, 20 years' time, they will pay back dividends, or maybe shorter. I think payback on solar panels tends to be between 6 to 8 years, depending on your installation, if it's onto a building. So that's quite a quick one. But a lot of business cases aren't looking that far into the future even. We're not looking at that de-riskifying of energy markets either on our business case for this type of thing. So are we using a purpose that's fit for purpose in how we're looking at things? And obviously we have the potential retrofitting costs. When we launch these projects, are we saying, is part of our business case of why we want to choose certain options, which may be more expensive up front, looking at what it's going to cost in 10 years' time to make this project, to make the project outcome, if it's a physical outcome, fit for purpose? Would you want to launch an app on that only phones prior 2015 could use? There'll be no point. So why are we pushing projects forward today in the full knowledge that there's going to be massive retrofit programs required to make buildings built today suitable for a decarbonized future in 5 to 10 years' time? Why are we doing this? It doesn't make any sense. Kind of key takeaways, I think, rattle through this very quickly, and I'll run through some kind of real world examples, is to take through that sustainability from the start of the project, change that lifetime costings. So let's take an example then. So the cost of one of the things that really gets me on sustainability is when we look at kind of transport is a very good example of this. People turn around and say electric vehicles are expensive. So now we're looking at the cost of electric van versus the cost of a diesel van. There may be a £5,000 to £10,000 difference, depending on the size of the vehicle. It's not as large as people think these days, but there will be a large capital. We've also got the cost to invest in the infrastructure required to power that van. We then have some organisational time required to review how we're using that van, what the purpose of the van is for, and that will then dictate what size of battery you can use to fulfill your business requirements of that vehicle. So then once we've done all that process, we can then make choices. However, the business case for replacing a van is normally we replace the van, let's find the cheapest option, replace the van, bang, not examining this. So if we take those whole lifetime costings of that infrastructure, the reduced cost of running an electric van versus a diesel van, which I know recent announcements may have reduced some of those savings, but we might be able to actually save money by buying those vans across an 8-year cycle or a 5-year cycle. We don't know, but we haven't used it in that business case process to get there. Yeah, I think a lot of what I was saying was being said in earlier talks. I think that's been quite interesting. But there's a whole process. Has anyone got any kind of direct questions and prompt me to move into something else? I'll just pop them in the chat, and then otherwise I'll just feel like I'm waffling at a screen.
Let me come back on this one and just remind people of the Q&A. There isn't anything in the Q&A, but please do ask. Jack, I've got some questions here that we created. I'm going to tell people a little bit of how we created the questions, and people may have seen them online. But we took the synopsis, the title and the synopsis of each of the presentations that people were going to make, and we asked our friend ChatGPT to come up with 3 provocative questions. Now that could be considered to be difficult questions. So here we go, and I see that there is one from Jennifer there, but let me just, as I've started on this one, come up with another one. And this is an area that interests me, business case and benefits management. So what happens when business cases ignore life cycle value and only see the upfront costs? What's the consequences of that one?
Well, the consequence of that one is usually the organisation is stuck with an unsuitable project at the end of the day. However, it very much depends on, unfortunately, the perspective of the organisation. So if you're a property developer and your aim is to flog the buildings as quickly as possible, it may be in your benefit not to include kind of those life cycle costs and just do it the cheapest possible. That probably reduces the value you can get for the item once it's sold, however. So I'm not sure it's going to be as big of a win as they often think. For instance, on property, to kind of go to passive house standard, you're usually 15 to 20% more capital required up front to kind of reach that passive house standard from our minimum insulation standards from today. And then the value of the house is being judged at 15 to 20% more for a passive house standard than it would be for a non-passive house standard. For those that aren't aware, passive house standard is a kind of sustainable house standard. It has incredibly good insulation standards. Kind of you have to hit certain air circulation stats, and you've got to have heating partly being provided by the sun through the windows. It's an incredibly high use standard, and you get the passive house plus, which means the house actually generates more power than it uses, which is quite a remarkable standard. That's a bit harder to hit in cold, damp locations like the UK than it is in sunny Spain. But you can see how I worked in an organisation, and our standard costing business cases was 4 years for capital programs.
Right.
This didn't allow you to even factor in solar panels, which are a very quick and easy win when it comes to life cycle costs.
Yes.
When you're looking at, the returns, the high cost of electric today, I think it's even better than some of the figures I'm remembering. But we were looking at 7 to 8 year payback period on putting solar onto buildings. But our standard approach was to 4 year cost, which was generally to the end of the capital program.
Yes.
Which made anything, absolutely anything beyond minimum standards appear ridiculous. So then what we were doing, we were then trying to readapt and add extra pages into the business case, which I got told off for at one point. But yeah, it's really important to kind of re-examine it. And I think it's a far deeper issue than just the business case.
Yes.
It is the problem of what is the project for? What are we trying to solve? I've tried to make this point, but we're quite often stuck in kind of that tunnel vision thinking when we start getting involved in a project. Because as a project professional, you're not necessarily involved in the strategy or even the budget decision to approve a kind of approach. You're quite often thrown in it once it is, we are doing this, off you go, kind of make this work. And that leads to a lot of bad decisions straight away. For instance, say we're in a city these days, and you're going to do a highways project to widen the middle of the road into the middle of the city from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. You'll write a business case and say it'll speed up traffic, it'll do this, it'll do the other. However, it'll increase emissions. It will increase the amount of cars parked in the middle of the city, so congestion will go up. The amount of times people spend in their cars will go up. It'll have a detrimental effect on public transport. It will do a whole raft of disbenefits.
Yes.
That will completely wipe out any benefit of that scheme. But if you are focused on that very singular process of that business development from your kind of fixed idea, you will lead a really nice business case and justify this project that will deliver the exact opposite of what you really should be trying to do.
Yeah. I guess you've probably heard the term strategic misrepresentation about business cases. Yes. Presumably you use the 5-case model that people might not understand. Is it worth just a minute on what the 5-case model actually means in practice to you? Maybe can I just kind of preempt that with one of the things that I've been working on, I worked on until the end of last year, was what's called the New Hospital Programme. and I was the benefits lead on that. And essentially, we were assessing the asset over its lifetime, which the Green Book talks about 60 years. So a lot of the calculations seemed pretty, what's the word, hypothetical almost. But it was, you've been talking around sort of 4 years in terms of the capital programs. Many we were looking at over 60 years, and very, very difficult to predict the future anywhere near that. So back to 5K business model and how you apply that.
So it should be the 5 cases. I've just got them up on my phone to make sure I said the right titles, because they order them in a specific way for a reason. Strategic case, economic case, commercial case, financial case, management case. And as you can tell, absolutely nothing about sustainability really in there at all. And commercial and financial case are often almost merged into one argument. You'll see a lot of those business cases where you'll read those two sections and say they're not meant to be the same thing, but
No,
they are but people write them as the same thing, and I think that's a misunderstanding. And again, economic case can be so closely linked to the kind of your financial case as well. But as you can tell just by the titles, it is a very finance driven kind of project plan. And I think this links quite strongly to the way that the British government has driven spending, directed spending over the last kind of 15 years. Because under the Procurement Act 2015, the main priority of any public sector organisation was value for money.
Yes.
And that was the core principle. That's changed under the Procurement Act 2023, which came into effect earlier this year, because it's always slightly behind the years it's launched. Don't ask too many questions on that one. It's not my strong point. But that kind of focus on value for money has driven business cases, and the fact that we're using a treasury model for business cases, and how that's incredibly short term. That 4 years comes from electoral cycles. Everything is very, very short term with the kind of the business case we're running.
Yep.
When really what we should be using a strategic case should really link very strongly back to those kind of key strategic ideas of the organization. It should be referencing your net zero sustainability plan very strongly in it. The organization will more than likely be committed to being net zero by 2050 at the very latest.
Yes.
In the public sector, a lot of organizations are committed to 2030 for their own operations and 2038 for the areas they govern. How realistic that is with kind of the financial restraints remains to be seen. The cost of retrofitting kind of large public estates runs into billions and billions of pounds, which clearly isn't forthcoming out of the Treasury anytime soon. So there are some issues there which we're not going to solve.
No.
But that strategic case should run through there. The economic case should be very much based on oil matters. So working in Bradford Council, having just moved here, it's really interesting to see how sustainability service is put into the Department of Growth. And this is linking back to that key strategic decision and decision making. It is clear, it is very clear with the reduction of emissions comes the reduction in costs of healthcare, improvement of welfare, improvement of people's welfare, reduction of time off sick, and increased productivity. If you are talking as a public organisation, producing sustainable projects that reduce emissions is in your financial interest, even if they're more expensive than chucking out diesel vehicles or gas boilers. That will cost you more money in the long term. If you are, I've noticed, was it National? No, it's the fire service, London Fire Brigade, have just started looking into the negative health impacts of their staff being stood around big diesel engined fire engines all the time. This is not an insignificant issue. We have thousands and thousands of people every day being diagnosed with respiratory illnesses, heart conditions. carbon reduction is a health issue for the
I get
industry.
that, and I do recall when we put together the KPIs for the new hospital program. There's a very wide range of outcomes that we considered, and we looked at kind of lead indicators and lag indicators and all those kind of things, and it's very difficult to find a common currency against which you can consider that. And the common currency idea is a segue to Hugo Mini, who I've worked with on things like social return on investment and social value. And I'm going to put one of Hugo's questions up. There are several here for us to look at together, and I think it's on that theme. So, should a local authority put a price on the reduction in the cost of healthcare, where health is a separate budget? So, probably a multi-layered question, but
Yes.
over to you.
Yes, is a simple answer. So that is kind of a big topic in the public sector at the moment, with the Health Determinants Research Centres, HDRCs, kind of in play. There is one in the Bradford district, kind of working, and I believe there are about a dozen of these research centres around the UK currently looking into kind of this, how the public sector can encourage the private sector to behave, and what kind of the health impact of kind of the way we conduct ourselves is. If you're interested in kind of immediate things, the Clean Air Zone in Bradford has resulted in £30,000 less a month of GP appointments for respiratory illnesses in the first 12 months of it being operated. So you can see immediately a very big cost analysis can happen there, and that's not including the aftercare treatments that be required for those people that have gone to the GP. That's solely the cost of the GP appointments alone to the British taxpayer. So we can look at that. So there does need to be a wider examination, and this fits into strategic aims, and then the economic case really needs to be adapted. What is the impact of the project on the wider organisation? If you are a private sector organisation and you have, I don't know, you're a trucking company, how many days off sick are your staff having? What is the health impacts on your staff? How much is that costing you lost productivity? Can you keep people long term? Or are they all taking early retirement due to health issues? These are huge costs to a business, and loss of expertise, loss of productivity. Is that being examined in that economic case for the project? Are you trying to take that wider holistic view of it? And that's when this business case process is ignoring all of these things and then treating sustainability as an add-on. We've had a lot today about various tools, and my experience of all the tools is that they're not used at these early stages.
No,
they're used, like I said, at that kind of technical design stage. Usually, when that design is a fixed concept in people's head as well. The amount of times I've seen kind of sustainability review after REBA stage 4.
Yes.
So we've already had a detailed technical design, and suddenly we go back and go, oh, could we do something else? Well, yes, but now we've got to pay the engineers and the architects and everyone to go look at it again, and nobody wants to do that.
No.
So
Okay.
That's the problem.
Let's put another question up there around net zero. So this one's from Jennifer. And do you think the term net zero is very helpful? It is not clear what this means to the general public, and has also been somewhat politicized recently.
I think the concept of net zero is quite easy, because if it explains something, because effectively you can just go, it is the emissions from burning stuff, and we want to make sure that we are putting less rubbish out of burning stuff into the environment, or equal to what we are taking out. So it does allow for that balance to be had. However, yes, it is heavily politicized, and it does seem very abstract to people. So it's much easier to talk in very basic terms of, do you want to have diesel vehicles emitting this in your area?
Yeah.
Look at the emissions maps. It's very helpful if you have any sort of access. You will have access database, but showing people kind of the levels of particulates in certain areas, explain to them that effectively in some area, in some high pollution areas, it's like having a cigarette in your mouth at all times almost. So there's ways of presenting it which are very different. And yes, I agree. Net zero may not be that helpful at times, but this is where a well-rounded process going from that strategic aim onwards can negate a lot of that, because a lot of things that reduce emissions save money long term or can make money. Um, EV charging for electric vehicles. Not saying electric vehicles are the answer to all of our problems. They're not, but they will reduce emissions, particularly in our cities, massively. Um, Sainsbury's aren't investing in a massive charging network across the country because they're really nice. They're
Mm,
doing it because it will make them money and will draw people to their stores.
yeah,
It's the same with Starbucks. We can go through all of these companies, and yes, they may have people in them that want to have support sustainability and want to do that. But these are businesses that are there to make money. They're not going to do something which is going to lose them a load of money long term.
sure. I mean, one of the things I'm very conscious of is the way in which electric vehicles seem to have grown and grown. So they're much wider and much heavier than ever they have been in the past, which has a lot of consequences when you're designing a car park, and how do you do this? And I can't remember the council that's done it, but any vehicle that is over 2 tons or something like that will be paid an additional to pay an additional amount for the congestion charge. So, you know,
Paris.
was it Paris? I really don't know, but
It was
there
Paris.
are, I suppose, tensions or things that are pushing things in the wrong direction, so far as we're concerned.
I would say with the larger vehicles thing, that isn't an EV phenomenon. That is the SUV takeover of the world in cars. I remember doing some work with some companies, and it must be back in 2018, 2019, when Rolls-Royce launched the Cunningham, um, which was their first SUV model ever. But SUVs at the time were the only growing sales segment of vehicles in the world.
Right.
So, the companies producing EV SUVs is more to do with the fact that SUVs have been what has been selling in ICE vehicles for the last 10 years. And they've just kind of gone, well, if we want to get someone out of their um, Qashqai, we've got to
Yes.
give them something like a Qashqai. Um, and what was the top seller this year? The Puma. Puma was the top seller this year. Ford Puma, wasn't it? Again, a little crossover SUV. That's kind of what's been selling. I think it's been interesting to see in the EV market the proliferation of little small hatchbacks that have come out this year.
Yeah.
Quite exciting. I quite like the look of the Renault 5. It's quite funky.
Mm.
But that's kind of a by the by. I think that's down to cost, and maybe we'll see a change back to slightly smaller vehicles. Um, there's also been kind of the increase in safety standards, which I don't think anyone here is going to just say is a bad thing, but that has made vehicles bigger and heavier,
Yeah.
without a doubt. When you compare them to the cars of the 80s with no airbags and
Yes.
manual.
There's quite a few questions coming in. I think maybe we'll just take one or two more. Then, yeah, I think actually this is an echo of what you were saying. So we'll just put that one up there. From Leven, is it? It's indeed an SUV issue, not an EV issue. They're really nice small electric cars. So precisely what you were saying, and I appreciate that fact. I'll certainly look at things slightly differently there. Let's just have a quick look at the Q&A. That's EVs. Yeah, let's go with this one thing. I think perhaps as a final question. So from Pauline, really interested in knowing from your government position how to change the mindsets of project managers when oil and gas projects are approved.
I think it's really difficult with the oil and gas projects. And you can see new gas turbines being approved currently to go onto the grid. Um, in West Yorkshire, in fact, there's one that's going through the approval process now. On one hand, you want to say no, this is definitely a bad thing, and you can say this, but we also have to look at things, I suppose, from a long-term sustainability point of view. if that's oil and gas being produced in the UK and we're going to tail off our usage, then having it from more local sources is going to be less harmful than shipping in more from the Middle East or from America. Liquefied gas coming in from America is an awful bit of environmental work. We're talking about mass emissions to get the stuff here. It's got to be cooled at great energy cost, which we're currently burning gas to do. And then you can look at that. So if you're taking gas project in the UK and extracting local gas to use locally, then that's going to be less harmful. However, that's only worth really supporting if it is a mere stopgap option to drive down the usage of oil and gas for the next 15 years. It's undoubtedly going to be a large part of our energy system for the next 15 to 20 years. We're going to allow diesel vans going to be sold up until 2035. So they're going to have a 12, 15-year lifespan realistically. So we're already at 2050 with the vehicles that are going to be sold. This is before we look at gas boilers and all sorts of things which are going to require this for quite some time.
Yeah, I think I sense that you could talk about this all day, but unfortunately I realise we're constrained by time because there's another session straight after this. So two things really as we wrap up. First of all, I've put in chat the link to Mentimeter so you can go and provide some feedback, but also collect your PDU code. And we've double checked that code will work. So if you're listening in, credentialed PMI member, I'm sure you're interested in that. Do please complete that survey. Secondly, is it all right if I just quickly replace your slide there? I don't know whether you can just down the bottom there, remove that. If I share my screen. So I just wanted to tell you where you can go next effectively. So there are 3 sessions. You can read them for yourself there, but Heikil, Bronwyn, and then David and Mark Astley. I won't attempt to lead the witness on that, but do please take a look, make your decision, and head over to hear Heikil, Bronwyn, or David and Mark. And incidentally, Heikil will now be our closing keynote when we come towards the end of our session around 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you once again, Jack. Been an absolute brilliant session. And, we look forward to seeing you more within the PMI.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you then. Bye-bye.